and welcome to the introductory lecture of Biases in Behavioral Finance. Let's talk about what is a familiarity bias. The familiarity bias is when investors tend to invest in what they know, such as domestic companies or locally owned investments. As a result, investors are not diversified across multiple sectors and types of investments, which can reduce risk. Investors tend to go with investments that they have a history with or have familiarity. Ease of processing. These are the heuristics. Ease of processing amounts to ready understanding. Information that is easier to understand is often viewed as more likely to be true. Kahneman and Tversky defined this heuristic as a mental shortcut for making frequency or probability judgments based on the ease with which instances or occurrences can be brought to mind. In many cases, delay is not feasible. Decisions need to be made even if the environment is one of limited attention, information, and processing capacity, as financial markets. So, shortcuts or heuristics are necessary. A heuristic is a decision rule that utilizes a subset of the information set. Since in virtually all cases people must economize and cannot analyze all contingencies, we use heuristics without even realizing it. Heuristics come in all shapes and sizes. One dichotomy is between those heuristics that are reflexive, autonomic, and non-cognitive, and economize on effort. These are the type 1 heuristics, and others which are cognitive in nature. These are type 2 heuristics. Some heuristics influence preference through comfort seeking. Heuristics in general occur because they are efficient ways of responding when we are faced with problems or decisions. They come about automatically, allowing us to allocate our mental energy elsewhere. The specific types of heuristics occur in different contexts. The availability heuristic happens because we remember certain memories better than others. The representativeness heuristic can be explained by prototype theory, and the anchoring and adjustment heuristic happens due to lack of incentive to put in the effort required for sufficient adjustments. The availability heuristic occurs because we can call certain memories to mind more easily than others. The example that Kahneman and Tversky give is that participants asked if more words in the English language start with the letter K or have the third letter as K. Most participants responded with the former. In actuality, it is the latter that is true, but it is much harder to think of words that have K as a third letter than it is to think of words that start with K. In this case, our memories of words that begin with K come to mind more readily than do memories of words with the third letter as K. Let's talk about the representativeness heuristic. It has been proposed as a means to assess the probability that an object A belongs to a class B. Example, that a person described as meek is a pilot, or that an event A is generated by a process B. Example, that the sequence head, tail, and head, tail was generated by randomly throwing a fair coin. This heuristic can lead to errors because similarity or representativeness judgments are not always influenced by factors that should affect judgments of probability, such as base rates. The representativeness heuristic has also been evoked to explain numerous judgment phenomena, including the hot hand phenomena. This observation in basketball is seen as the belief that a player is more likely to score again after he or she already scored successfully. than after missing a shot. And the gambler's fallacy, the belief that a successful outcome is due after a run of bad luck. Now we also talk about the roles of emotions, which is a key aspect and the prime aspect of behavioral finance theories. Some researchers suggest that the mood of the investor translates into the mood of the market and in turn impacts market outcomes. These conclusions should be interpreted with caution because we do not fully understand the relationship between emotion and risk attitude. Empirical evidence documents this tendency. The disposition effect, for example, has traditionally been explained by prospect theory because of the shape of value function. Investors are less risk averse for losers, so they are more likely to hold on to them. Recent theoretical arguments and experimental evidence suggest that loss aversion resulting from fear or regret may provide a better account of the disposition effect. Another example is according to the house money effect, after a prior gain, investors become less risk averse. After losses, the snake bit effect comes by, whereby people are less likely to take on risk. And finally, the break-even effect, where people are more likely to take on risk. These operate in opposite directions, but the later seems to usually dominate. Path dependence in decisions, which suggests that people sometimes integrate sequential gambles, is corroborated for large-scale gambles by considering the choices made by game show contestants. Affect reflects a person's impression or assessment of a stimulus because a person's perception is tied to the effective reaction. Decisions are impacted by affect. Television and print reporters commonly attribute the decisions people make to emotions. The financial press, in particular, relies on emotion to explain the movements of financial markets, both up and down. But we really do not know that much about how emotions interact with behavioral influences and other emotions to produce the ultimate human actions and decisions. Even less is known about how the interactions of innately emotional people produce market outcomes. To provide a basis for our exploration of the role of emotion in financial decision making, let's review some of the pertinent psychological findings on emotion. Examples of common emotions are anger, contempt, disgust, fear, happiness, sadness, regret, and surprise. 6 observable features differentiate emotions from other mental states. These are cognitive antecedents, intentional objects, physiological arousal, physiological expressions, valence, and action tendencies. Early theories of emotion focused on whether autonomic responses that are not being controlled by us defined emotions and how the brain processes information. More recently, theorists recognize that evolution is an important determinant of emotions. Emotions promote communication, both within and across cultures and species. Decision making actually suffers without emotion. Emotions push us to make a decision when timing is critical. Emotions help us to make better decisions because they allow us to better evaluate the information. A person's success is somehow dependent on his emotional intelligence, in addition to his intelligence quotient. Emotions and cognition are somehow intertwined, just as the mind and body interact. Although we might not always choose our emotions, we can regulate their intensity. Let's talk about the substance of emotions. The 6 key substances of emotion, those were given by Elster. Number 1 is cognitive antecedent. In most cases, beliefs trigger an emotional response. Let's see. For example, you are being hit. Another driver has just crossed the red light, and he was about to hit you. Now your belief triggered an emotional response that since the driver was reckless and careless about the rules, he almost drove into you and hit you. Second, intentional objects. Emotions are about something like a person or a situation. Let's take the previous example where the driver was reckless and careless about the traffic rules. Is the intentional object physiological arousal? This is about the hormonal and nervous system changes that accompany emotional responses. Imagine when the driver was about to hit you, isn't your blood pressure rises or the heart rate rises? Fourth is physiological expression. Emotions can be characterized by observable expressions that are associated with how a person functions. Example, when you see flushing of face, you may say that a person is shy or maybe in anger. But if a person is clenching his fists at the same time, then you can say that the person is in anger or maybe in joy. Fifth point is valence. Emotions can be rated on a scale with a neutral point in the center and positive to negative feelings on the endpoints. Consider it as a spectrum. Example for this could be that the daughter of the author can be into a boredom, severe boredom. Sixth point is action tendencies. Emotions are linked to action tendencies. Now, your action tendency when the driver was almost about to hit you was to give him a feast of your mind. But you could not do that because the other social factors were also acting at the same time, that you could go out of control in anger. Emotion is not all bad. It can improve decision making in 2 respects. Damasio indicate that emotion improves. How? Emotion pushes individuals to make some decision when making a decision is paramount. Often a decision has to be made. Second point is emotion can assist in making optimal decisions. Positive feelings can make it easier to access information in the brain, promote creativity, improve problem solving, enhance negotiation, and build efficient and thorough decision making. It really comes down to emotional balance, that is emotional intelligence. Conclusion for the emotions is rationality in economics is a highly objective notion where human nature interferes with the decision-making process. But as human nature is present in all human decisions, rationality may be highly subjective. Therefore, the notion of rationality as described in economics may not be entirely rational itself. I will give you an example of a very famous case, which is the Phineas Gage. This was documented and was studied by Damasio. The Phineas Gage example tells you how emotions play a role in decision making and planning. Phineas Gage, he was a construction worker when an iron rod hit him through his head and it passed through his cheek. The first surprise that came to everyone was that Phineas was still alive. Second, his personality developed certain changes. He was very efficient before the lesion, but after that, he survived after the injury. His personality changed a lot. He couldn't plan because his emotions were somehow controlling his action planning. Therefore, it is very important to understand that emotions play a very important role when we make a decision. And we need a balanced form of emotions. We have in the brain the limbic system, which is the emotional center of the brain. In that, we have amygdala, which is mainly responsible for the risk aversion behavior. So, behavioral finance also has an offshoot in the coming time, which is neuroeconomics and neurofinance, in which we talk about the neuroscience of the behavior. This is the future development in the field of behavioral finance. Let's talk about behavioral finance, how it joins the standard finance in providing evidence that markets are not value efficient. And behavioral finance describes the cognitive and emotional errors that mislead investors possessing nothing but widely available information into believing that markets are easy to beat, and the ones beyond errors that induce them into efforts to beat markets. Other important developments that are emerging in the field of behavioral finance, as I've already discussed, they are advances in neuroscience that could change the decision equation as scientists get a better sense of how the brain makes choices. Although that research is in very early state, decisions are increasingly shunted from people to computers, which aren't subject to the same information processing limits or biases humans face. The advances in neuroscience have led to the improvements in neuroeconomics and neurofinance fields. These fields are in the stage of infancy. In neuroeconomics and neurofinance, the behavior is studied through the brain imaging techniques, which are the neuroimaging techniques. For example, MRI, PET scan, CT scan, EEG, skin conductance response, etc. MRI can give you a non-invasive working of the brain. You can bring your subjects and subject them to certain gambling or say any financial decision making environment, and then you may record for the physiological and the anatomical advances that are happening in the brain, the working of the brain. In the brain, we have different systems to accommodate for risk-seeking and risk-aversive behavior. How does behavioral finance now contribute to our knowledge of finance? In our view, behavioral finance does not replace modern finance. Instead, it is an important complement. The tools of modern finance remain extremely useful for corporate managers, investors, and others who make financial decisions. Yet, the ebb and flow of science operates here as well. When results are uncovered that are inconsistent with conventional wisdom, new theory is posited, often building on the existing knowledge. At some point in the future, the new conventional theory will be shaped by behavioral findings. In this sense, we look forward to future developments in behavioral finance. Let's get back to our example where we discussed about overconfidence, overreaction, and overrepresentation in the financial markets. overconfidence is somehow very much bad for the financial markets. This can also be seen in a CEO making a decision where they will say that I knew it all, if their financial decision comes out to be true. Therefore, the self-controlling tendencies for certain kind of behavior and emotions is essential while making financial decisions. Now, these are the additional references that I would like to offer to you. You can go through these references for a reading in behavioral finance. And we can just now sum up the entire lecture. So, we have talked about the biases and the heuristics and how emotions play an important role in financial decision making. The important bias that we've talked about is loss aversion theory, which is also a part of the prospect theory. And we're going to quickly revise the loss aversion. So, loss aversion occurs when investors place a great weighting on the concern for losses than the pleasure from market gains. Another important aspect that we must revise is experiential bias. An experiential bias occurs when investors' memory of recent events makes them biased or leads them to believe that the event is far more likely to occur again. Here, I've given you the example of financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, which has led many investors to exit the stock market. The confirmation bias is another bias that we have studied, which talks about when investors have a bias toward accepting information that confirms their already held belief in an investment. So, they cannot correct about their investment decisions, even if the information is flawed. I would like to further talk about and revise the familiarity bias. The familiarity bias is when investors tend to invest in what they know, such as domestic companies or locally owned investments. Some investors also tend to invest in the companies that they maybe have been a part of in the history, in the past. So, our topic is, I'm going to conclude the introductory session for you all, and behavioral finance is basically about the biases, heuristics that have come up and they shape your decision making. In financial markets, it is very much important and pertinent to understand how to control the emotions. The fear and greed has to be taken care of. And thank you all.